project right now that kind of came out of your thesis at Royal Roads. Can you let us know a little bit more about that?
So, in doing my thesis, of course, and then just in personal interest, I really started to research my great grandfather a lot more, and I began to run across. I didn't know anything about him, say about 2011 or 2012. I just began to learn about him at that time when my mom that passed away had inherited a bunch of genealogical information about him, and then used that to follow up on my great grandfather. He turned out he was a pistol. He was quite a guy, a really interesting guy. Um, and along the way, I kept talking to people about his story, which is, he was the first guy in Canada to establish public health standards. So the fact that we have, sort of clean water and septic and sewage and garbage disposal and even workplace and health and safety standards were all things that he pioneered. And he also has there's a tragic angle to his story as well as the fact that he, championed, better conditions for Indigenous people at a time when most people thought that, the Indigenous people were just a substandard race who weren't going to survive. He was one of the ones who contradicted that kind of thinking at the time. So, and he paid a real price for it. I mean, this was a man who had a really significant career that ended up in ruins because he insisted on advocating for Indigenous people. So, as I told the story to people, I always got the same reaction. And these are people who've known that I've been in media and that I'd done documentaries before, and they all said, you should do a documentary on him. So about a month after I'd finished my thesis, I went and met all these Bryce cousins of mine that I'd never met before. And I just found out that they were a really interesting group of people, including one woman who was on council in Walkerton in the late 90s and had been flagging reports about the quality of Walkerton's water, and had been bringing it up in council and been getting no response from council at all. And of course, that all blew up in 2000, right? And so I realized that, the legacy of Peter Bryce still exists. It's out there, and it's a pretty significant legacy. So I teamed up in September 2014 with a filmmaker named Peter Campbell from Gumboot Productions. And Peter had done a film, one of the first films on residential school survivors called Return to the Healing Circle. And he'd done that about 1994, 96. And Peter and I are actually friends. I've known him for many, many years. So we decided we'd team up in a documentary. And so we've been working on this documentary basically for the last, I would say, year and a half. And we've done two major shoots, one of them in Toronto where the School of Public Health at U of T has named an institute on Indigenous public health after my great-grandfather. And then in the summer, the Beechwood Cemetery, which is Canada's national cemetery, erected a historical plaque in his honor. So there was a naming ceremony and unveiling ceremony for that as well.
That's
which
in
was
Ottawa,
attended
right?
In Ottawa, yeah. And that was attended by people like, of course, Cindy Blackstock was there. And Cindy Blackstock has been perhaps the greatest advocate for my great-grandfather of anybody. So she was there, and she'd actually done a lot to organize this event. Marie Wilson was there. She's one of the commissioners from the National Commission on Truth and Reconciliation. Perry Bellegarde, also our former Auditor General Sheila Fraser was there, and a number of historians, like a number of really big people. So we managed to, record that ceremony, and we also did interviews with some of the historians and some of the people who've kept my great-grandfather's name alive over the years. And we managed to interview sort of the matriarch of the Bryce family, who's like 92 years old, and there are pictures of her sitting on his lap, when she was about 4 years old. And so, we got her to tell her story. And what I found, these people were just great, really interesting people. Along the way, we met a woman named Charlene Barehead, who's the education lead for the National Commission on Truth and Reconciliation, and she was really taken by the story. So she's commissioned us, and we are just now finishing a 20-minute educational film for grades 7 and 8. And we'll have that done probably in about 6 weeks' time. But that's still going to leave us with the issue of funding the rest of this documentary. So Peter and I made a commitment really early on not to go the broadcast funding route for a number of reasons. One of which was that there just isn't money around for one-off documentaries like that through that system anymore. So we went ahead without doing that, but we've been looking for funding ever since, and we've probably raised, I'd say, about $25,000 in cash and in kind since then. But we still need to raise like another $100,000. So we need to do another major trip to Ontario to interview people, and then do the final post-production. So we're well along on this project, but on the other hand, we just have this big hurdle of coming up with, multiple thousands of dollars to finish it off.
And how difficult have you found it working on this project while teaching? Is it kind of like going back to when you were doing your degree? You're kind of dedicating your time to two different things. How do you manage all of that?
I don't know. You just do, right? You do it on a regular basis. Yeah, it has been tough. The other thing is we have a relatively new program that I'm teaching in, and so we're still, as the first year you develop, you teach in a program, there's a lot of development time that goes into it. And then when that first year's done, you kind of look at what you've done, and then there's another big lump of development time that you put into it for the second year. It takes a good 2 or 3 years before you really get a program going. So I'm still really busy. I'm still too busy for my own good. And right at the moment, if you talk to independent producers, they'll tell you that, 75 to 85% of their time is looking for funding. And I spend more time writing emails, making phone calls, making contacts, trying to find somebody who's going to help us fund this film. So the production time really hasn't been that big. It's just been, making the contacts and looking for money that's been a real tough process.
Once the film is completed, where do you hope to see it? Will you put it on the documentary circuit or film circuit, or?
I think that, we have three possibilities. Of course, we'll approach broadcasters to see if they'll acquire it. And then the second thing we'll do is try to put it into the documentary circuit, of course. But I think where we'll find our biggest distribution will be amongst educational situations, high schools and post-secondary. So Peter's experience has been that's been the most lucrative distribution for his films. And that's where his agent, who we're working through, is really an expert at it. So I think you'll find it used a lot in classrooms. And for me, as a teacher, and my goal is really just to, get my great grandfather's name out there. I think that's probably the result that I'm most excited at.
And just as a final note, what kind of advice would you give to broadcasting instructors who are thinking of taking on major projects like this, as they're teachers, but they want to do something outside of teaching? What kind of advice would you give to them?
Oh, I'd say do it. I'd say that anything that you could do that gets you closer to what students might be doing when they're going out is good. I've learned so much. I did lots of documentary, but I always did it in the context of a television station, right? In the context of daily news, or working through a newsroom that was doing daily news, and we did documentary off the side of the desk. That was what happened in my career, and certainly that's one thing, and it's really good, and it's really interesting and important. But to actually do your own independent documentary is a different ballgame altogether. And I've learned tons about production techniques. I've learned tons about narrative. My producer looks at narrative in a totally different way than I do. So it's been really interesting trying to figure out, how's he gonna tie all this stuff together? So all these things add up, and as much as it's been time consuming, I'm charged about it. I'm really, I'm having a good time, and I'm learning lots, and it's been a great process.
Well, thank you for taking the time to talk to us about this project, and we wish you best of luck, and we look forward to seeing it once it's done. Thank you.
You bet. I'll come by to a conference and give you guys a showing.
For sure.